Tears blurred Emma Brooks' vision as the word fired cut through the quiet morning air of Riverstone Diner like a knife.
Get out!
One single syllable and her already fragile world cracked. Linda Rowe's voice was sharp, clinical, dripping with corporate righteousness as she recited company policy and violations, the unforgivable offense. Emma had paid for a freezing, hungry stranger's $5 meal with her own tip money. As she was marched toward the exit, her apron taken from her trembling hand, she felt the burning weight of every stare behind her. Co-workers, customers, people she had served for years. She had lost everything because she chose compassion over protocol. But what Emma did not know, what no one in that diner could have guessed, was that the man she had helped was no drifter at all. And his return the next day would not just change her life. It would upend an entire empire built on rules she had been punished for breaking. The night settled over Riverstone, Colorado, like a soft gray veil muting the colors of the small mountain town until only the warm glow of street lamps and the distant shimmer of snow on the Rockies remained visible. A light storm had swept through hours earlier, leaving the roads damp and the air sharp with cold. Each breath seemed to carry a faint metallic tingle, as if winter itself was whispering through the narrow streets. On the corner of Maple and Pine Riverstone, Diner stood as it always did, its neon sign flickering its windows, fogged by the hum of customers and its presence offering shelter to anyone seeking warmth on a mountain night. Inside, under retro lights and chrome edges, dulled by time, Emma Brooks moved between tables with a quiet grace. At 27, she was a young woman with a soft oval face, fair skin, delicate freckles across her nose, and chestnut-brown hair tied back in a loose ponytail that bounced gently as she walked. Her dark brown eyes held a gentleness sharpened by responsibility, and her posture, straight but never rigid, hinted at a resilience carved from years of carrying burdens too heavy for someone her age. Emma had always been kind-hearted, a trait shaped by losing her parents early and stepping into the role of caretaker for her younger brother, long before she truly understood adulthood. Her laughter came easily, but her worries lived quietly beneath the surface, stitched into the way she squeezed her apron ties a little too tight or bit the inside of her cheek when she thought no one was watching. Tonight the diner buzzed with the usual blend of truckers, warming their hands on coffee mugs, locals chatting about weather updates, and teenagers dipping fries into milkshakes during late study breaks. The air carried scents of sizzling bacon hot chocolate and a faint sweetness from the pies cooling behind the counter. Emma offered a brief smile to a couple sharing a slice of cherry pie, then tucked her order pad into her apron pocket and approached the coffee station to refill a pot. Just as she turned toward the counter, the diner door creaked open, letting in a gust of freezing wind that brushed across her skin. She glanced up. A man stepped inside, hesitant, hunched slightly, as though bracing against both the cold and the world. This was Jack Turner, appearing for the first time that night. Jack looked to be in his mid-40s, tall but frail, with shoulders that sagged under an invisible weight. His sandy hair was tangled beneath a worn beanie, and a rough stubble darkened his jaw. His clothes were threadbare and dusted with road dirt, a faded flannel shirt under a heavy brown coat, whose elbows were frayed jeans torn at one knee, and boots scuffed from long miles. His blue eyes, clear but shadowed, held the wary alertness of someone who had been ignored too many times and judged before he could speak. He walked slowly, every movement careful, as if afraid he might be asked to leave before he even reached a table. From his posture and the quiet drip of meltwater from his coat hem, Emma could tell he'd been outside far too long. Despite his rough appearance, there was a gentleness in the way he approached the counter, his hands clasped together as though to keep them from trembling. "Excuse me," he said softly. Voice rasped from cold and underuse. Could I just get a cup of hot water?" Something inside, Emma tightened an instinct that rose from a place of compassion deeper than logic. She had seen people in hardship before, but Jack carried a different kind of exhaustion, the kind that lingered in a person's bones. She stepped toward him with a calm smile, the kind she saved for people who needed softness more than anything else. "Of course," she said. "Please take any seat you like." Jack hesitated before sliding into a booth near the window, the vinyl creaking as he settled into it. Emma prepared the hot water, and as she set the cup down in front of him, she noticed how his fingers hovered above the steam before curling around the mug like he was absorbing warmth for the first time in days. "Thank you," he murmured, eyes lowering in gratitude mingled with embarrassment. Emma sensed the quiet plea beneath his words. Hunger. Fear of asking for more. She reached behind the counter where a pot of vegetable soup simmered for staff meals. She ladled a generous portion into a bowl, added a small piece of cornbread, and brought it to him without a word. Jack looked up, startled. I didn't order this," he said, voice uneven. Emma smiled. "It's on the house." His eyes glistened, not tears, but something close to them, as he whispered a hoarse, "Thank you." His hands trembled when he picked up the spoon. Emma didn't hover. She simply gave him space and moved on to check a nearby table. But she kept glancing over, not out of suspicion, but concern. Each time she looked, Jack was eating slowly and with deliberate gratitude, as though honoring every bite. Outside the diner, Riverstone's quiet streets seemed to echo with the weight of winter, but inside warmth expanded slowly from the booth where the stranger sat. Meanwhile, across town, another part of Emma's world frayed silently under pressure. Tommy Brooks, her 17-year-old brother, sat slumped in the cramped office of the school counselor. Tommy was tall and skinny with unruly dark brown hair and a face that still hovered between boyhood and adulthood. His eyes, normally bright with humor, were clouded tonight with frustration and exhaustion. Tommy had always been energetic, loyal, and stubborn traits, influenced by losing their parents young and growing up with Emma as both sister and caregiver. But the stress of their financial situation had carved impatience into him, making him quicker to anger and slower to trust. He'd picked a fight earlier with another student who'd mocked his second-hand jacket and said his sister worked at a greasy dump. Tommy rarely defended himself, but when it came to Emma, even a whisper against her could make him snap. Ms. Harrington, the counselor, was a woman in her late 50s with silver hair pinned in a loose bun and glasses perched at the tip of her nose. She wasn't unkind, but her voice carried the fatigue of someone who had guided too many troubled teenagers through too many late afternoon talks. "Tommy," she said gently, "this is the third incident this semester. You need to talk to your sister about what's going on." Tommy clenched his fists. "She already has enough to worry about." Harrington sighed. "But you can't keep hiding things. If you don't tell her, I'll be forced to." "Please don't." The plea came sharp, raw, too quick. He wasn't scared for himself. He was scared of adding any burden to Emma's shoulders. She was his anchor, his shield against the world, and he refused to be the reason she broke. Back at the diner, Emma collected plates from another table, humming softly under her breath to keep herself alert through the long shift. When she passed Jack, she noticed he had pushed the empty soup bowl aside, but didn't reach for the water again. He looked slightly warmer, slightly less burdened, but still fragile like a candle flame trembling in a draught. "Can I get you anything else?" Emma asked. Jack shook his head. "You've already done more than I deserve." She didn't argue, only offered a smile that said she disagreed. As she walked away, Jack watched her with an expression that blended gratitude and quiet astonishment. It had been years since someone looked at him without suspicion or pity. Outside the window, the wind picked up scattering fine snowflakes across the glass like tiny silver sparks. Inside the diner continued its nightly rhythm, but for Emma this night held a strange stillness, as though something in the air shifted the moment Jack walked in. She didn't know why, but she felt she had done something important, something that mattered. She couldn't imagine yet how a simple bowl of soup would ripple into the days ahead. For now, all she knew was that a stranger had found warmth at her table, and somewhere across town, her brother was fighting battles she still didn't know existed. Morning broke over Riverstone with a brittle stillness, the kind that settles after a long, cold night. Frost laced the edges of the diner windows like delicate white feathers, and the surrounding mountain peaks glowed faintly pink under the first rays of daylight. Cars crawled along Maple Street tires, crunching over thin sheets of ice, and inside Riverstone Diner, the metallic clatter of pans and the hiss of the griddle marked the beginning of a new shift. For Emma Brooks, however, the day began with a quiet dread tightening in her chest. Her brown hair, usually tied with a certain looseness, was pulled back too tightly, revealing shadows beneath her warm eyes, shadows carved by worry she hadn't shaken since last night. She tried to push through the fatigue as she clocked in, gripping her order pad with fingers that felt colder than they should. The memory of the man she helped the stranger with trembling hands and a tired face still lingered with her. She wondered if Jack had found a warm place to sleep, but she didn't have time to dwell on it. Not today. At the far end of the counter stood Linda Rowe, the diner's manager, flipping through a stack of printed reports with the precision of someone who believed order was more important than kindness. Linda was in her late 40s, short and compact with a boxy frame and sharp features, softened only slightly by the faint freckles that dusted her nose. Her hair, dyed a severe shade of black, was pulled into a no-nonsense bun, and her glasses perched halfway down her nose in a permanent posture of disappointment. Linda wasn't cruel by nature, but years of corporate pressure and a failed marriage had hardened her. She had once been friendly, even hopeful, but after her husband left her for a younger woman in corporate HQ, cut half her staff in the same month, she began to cling to rules as though they were the only things that couldn't betray her. Emma approached cautiously, sensing the tension crackling around Linda like sparks from frayed wires. "Morning, Linda," she said softly. Linda didn't look up. "Clocked in late again by 30 seconds, Emma." "Aye, sorry. The roads save it. Tables 8 through 11 need setting." Emma nodded and hurried away, swallowing the sting of the reprimand. She moved to her section, adjusting salt shakers and aligning napkins. She forced a smile when the first customers walked in, including a tired couple who had spent the night driving through a snowstorm. Her voice stayed gentle even as her mind raced with Bill's grocery lists and Tommy's asthma medication, which she still hadn't refilled. Just as she delivered the couple their pancakes, Linda's voice sliced through the room like a blade. "Emma, my office, now." The diner's chatter hushed slightly. Emma's heart dropped, but she set down the last plate carefully and walked toward the small glass-walled office near the back. Inside, a second figure was waiting Carl Walters, the assistant manager, a large, soft-spoken man in his early 60s with a round belly-thinning gray hair and an aura of quiet resignation. He had been working at the diner since before Emma was born. Carl had always been kind to her, slipping her an extra break when she looked exhausted or covering her tables when she had to take a phone call about Tommy. He looked uncomfortable now, fingers drumming nervously on the counter. Linda held a printout in her hand, a receipt, last night's records. Emma's stomach twisted. "Do you see this?" Linda demanded. "Table 14, a meal was rung up under staff comp." Emma inhaled slowly. "Linda." He was freezing and hungry. He only asked for hot water. "I gave him soup from the soup that was not authorized," Linda snapped. "You circumvented policy. You cost the company money. It was just soup. And it wasn't even busy at—" "It is not your decision to make," Linda said, voice rising. "We do not give free food. We do not encourage freeloaders. Do you understand how this looks?" Emma opened her mouth, but Linda cut her off again. "I had a surprise audit this morning. The regional office flagged that transaction. They want accountability." Carl looked down, shame clouding his eyes. He didn't want to be part of this, but he had no power to stop it. "Linda, please," Emma said, voice trembling. "I'm a good worker. You know I am. I didn't mean any harm. It was just one bowl. One bowl today becomes 3 tomorrow," Linda said coldly. "You broke protocol, you undermined management, and you put this diner at risk." Emma took a shaky step forward. "Linda, I really need this job." "Maybe you should have thought of that," Linda snapped before handing out charity, "like you're running a soup kitchen." And then she said the words Emma had feared most. "Emma Brooks, you're fired. Turn in your apron and clock out immediately." The floor seemed to tilt beneath Emma's feet. "Linda!" "Please," she whispered. "My brother Tommy, he needs medication and rent is due, please." But Linda had already turned away, closing the audit report as though sealing Emma's fate. Carl finally looked up, guilt etched into every line on his face. I'm sorry, kid," he murmured. But nothing could soften the blow. Emma walked out of the office in a daze. The diner seemed too bright, too noisy, too sharp. Customers paused mid-bite. Another waitress, Molly Jenkins, a petite redhead with freckles and a shy personality, covered her mouth in shock. Emma untied her apron with trembling fingers, folded it carefully, and placed it on the counter. She didn't cry. Not here, not in front of everyone. She lifted her chin and walked out into the cold morning air. The wind bit through her coat like icy teeth. Snow flurries drifted lazily around her as she made her way to her old blue sedan parked by the curb. Her hands shook as she climbed in. She sat there, forehead pressed against the steering wheel, breath fogging the cold air. A notification buzzed on her phone. The message was from Mrs. Layton, the school dean, a stern, heavy-set woman in her late 50s with silver-streaked brown hair pulled tightly back. Known for her strict discipline but also for her fair judgments, she had overseen Riverstone High for 20 years. "Emma, please come to the school as soon as possible. It concerns Tommy." Her heart cracked wide open. At the school, Tommy sat on a bench outside the dean's office, knuckles scraped and jacket torn. His dark hair fell over his eyes, and he kept his shoulders, hunched jaw clenched in defensive anger. But beneath it, Emma recognized fear. "Tommy," she breathed. He looked up. The moment he saw her, the anger slipped away. I'm sorry. What happened? Some guy said stuff about you, said you worked at a dump and that we're broke. I just lost it." Emma knelt in front of him. "Tommy, you can't keep fighting everyone." His eyes glistened with frustration. "I'm working extra hours at the garage, Em. I'm trying to help." She froze. "What I didn't want to tell you, but I've been doing late shifts after school. That's why I've been so tired. I wanted to help pay the bills since it's just you taking care of everything." Emma pulled him into a tight embrace, her heart aching. "You shouldn't have to carry that, Tommy. You're just a kid." "But who else will help you?" he whispered. For a moment Emma stood there holding her brother in the fluorescent hallway. Her job was gone. Their world was tilting. But she tightened her arms around Tommy, grounding him and herself. "We'll figure it out," she murmured. "Together?" Outside, snow began to fall harder, swirling like white fire in the air. And somewhere in Riverstone, a spark had already been lit, one that neither Emma nor Tommy could see yet, but one that would soon change everything. Dawn had barely finished sweeping across the mountains when Jackson Hayes stepped out of the black SUV that waited for him behind the glass tower of Hayes Hospitality Group headquarters in Denver. The building, with its sleek steel ribs and massive windows reflecting the pale morning sky, stood like a cold monument to everything he had built or thought he had built. Now it felt more like a monument to his ignorance. Jackson, at 34, had the kind of polished appearance expected of a young CEO, tall, athletic, from years of private trainers, and sharp-featured with a clean jawline. But beneath that carefully assembled exterior lived a man haunted by contradictions. His eyes, deep gray with a faint blue rim, held a restless intelligence and lately a guilt he was trying and failing to outrun. He wore a charcoal coat over a fitted dress shirt today, but the ghost of last night's disguise clung to him like smoke, the frayed flannel shirt, the worn boots, the exhaustion he'd mimicked yet recognized all too easily. Because now he knew what true exhaustion looked like. He had seen it in the eyes of one waitress, Emma Brooks. Jackson entered the building with long strides, ignoring greetings from employees bustling around reception. A crisp-voiced secretary attempted a "Good morning, Mr. Hayes," but he barely acknowledged it. He needed quiet, he needed space, and he needed to face what last night had awakened inside him. He reached his private office on the 38th floor, a large room lined with bookshelves, accolades, and framed photos of his late father, Richard Hayes. Richard's stern yet warm face regarded him from every angle, the man who had dragged the Hayes empire from a tiny roadside motel chain into one of Colorado's most respected hospitality companies. His father's voice echoed in Jackson's mind. "A company isn't built on profit margins, son. It's built on the hands that wash the plates and sweep the floors." Jackson once believed he understood, but he had grown up, stepped into the role of CEO at 30, and drowned himself in spreadsheets and market expansions. Somewhere between corporate meetings and shareholder demands, he had drifted far from the philosophy his father had bled for. Last night forced him to look at that distance with brutal clarity. He walked to the mirror in the corner of his office, a tall pane of glass framed by dark wood. His reflection stared back at him, polished, powerful, successful. Yet beneath the surface he saw the face of the man who had sat hunched in a booth at Riverstone Diner, wearing clothes that weren't his eating food, given not out of obligation, but kindness. He had watched Emma break a rule that shouldn't have existed. He had watched her pay with her livelihood. He had done nothing. On the leather couch behind him sat Evan Patel, his chief operations officer, who had arrived early after receiving Jackson's cryptic 6 a.m. message. Evan was a slender man in his early 40s, with sharp cheekbones, neatly parted black hair, and glasses that always seemed to slide halfway down his nose. He was known for his calm intelligence and loyalty, but also for his meticulous adherence to corporate procedure. "You look like you haven't slept," Evan remarked, gently rising from the couch. The undercover assessment must have been intense. Jackson let out a slow breath. "You have no idea." Evan held a tablet in one hand, prepared to discuss numbers and reports, but Jackson raised a hand to stop him. "Before we go over anything, there's something I need to tell you." Evan sat again, sensing the gravity. Jackson began recounting the previous night entering Riverstone Diner disguised as a drifter meeting Emma, observing her kindness, watching her be reprimanded, and then fired because of him. With each detail, Evan's brows pulled tighter. "They fired her," Evan said finally. "Over soup," Jackson nodded. "Soup that cost them less than a quarter to make. Soup she paid for with her humanity." Evan pressed his fingers together thoughtfully. "You know policy, Jackson. It's strict. We implemented those guidelines." "Exactly," Jackson snapped, though not in anger at Evan. "We wrote those rules. We created a system that punishes kindness, a system that his voice cracked before he steadied it, hurts the very people keeping our business alive." Evan exhaled, conflicted. "I'm not disagreeing with you, but if we change policy, we have to consider." Evan Jackson said firmly, "I'm not talking about policy tweaks. I'm talking about the foundation." Evan sat back, taken aback by the gravity in Jackson's tone. There was a knock at the office door. Claire Morrison. Jackson's personal assistant poked her head in. Claire was in her early 30s, petite, with sandy blonde hair in a sleek bob and soft hazel eyes. She was efficient, warm, in a quiet way, and had worked for Jackson long enough to sense when something was weighing heavily on him. Her blouse was crisp, her skirt tailored, but her expression carried genuine concern. "Mr. Hayes, I received your message. You said you needed the files for Riverstone Diner." "Yes, bring me everything employee records, management history, incident reports for the past 2 years." She hesitated. "Is something wrong?" "Just bring them, Claire," he said, though his voice gentled at the end. She nodded and disappeared. When she returned minutes later, she set a thick folder on the desk. Jackson opened it and quickly found the employee file for Emma Brooks. A grainy ID photo stared up at him, Emma hair slightly messy, smile soft but tired. Under it, he saw her hire date, her spotless record, and a small section labeled "Dependent Tommy Brooks, age 17. His chest tightened. "She's caring for her brother," he murmured, "and we left her jobless." Quiet settled over the office as he flipped through more documents. That was when another file slipped out: Riverstone Diner's disciplinary history. A familiar name caught his eye. Linda Rowe, general manager. A small photograph accompanied it, Linda's face stern with a tight-lipped smile that didn't reach her eyes. Jackson studied the notes: exemplary efficiency, strong enforcement of policy, high turnover rate. Too high. "She's running that diner like a war camp," Jackson said, jaw hardening. Evan leaned in. "We promoted managers like her because they boosted profit metrics. She's doing exactly what the company rewarded." Jackson closed the folder with a heavy thud. Then the company has been rewarding the wrong things. Silence again, except this time it had a new weight, the beginning of a decision that would reshape everything. Claire knocked again, stepping into the office, holding a small cup of coffee. "You didn't request this," she said softly, "but I thought you needed it." Jackson accepted it with a tired smile. Sometimes the smallest gestures cut deepest. Sometimes they illuminated the truth. "Claire," he said, "do you think a company can lose its soul?" Claire studied him not as a CEO, but as a man. Only if the people running it stop looking. Jackson's throat tightened. She excused herself, leaving him with the unfolding storm inside his mind. He moved to the window and looked down at the shimmering city. It felt distant, blurred beneath the weight of what he'd realized. He saw Emma's face as she placed soup in front of him without hesitation. He saw her eyes fill with fear as she was fired. And worst of all, he saw his own silence. "I watched her fall," he whispered. "And I said nothing." Evan stood. So what now? Jackson turned from the window, a fierce clarity burning behind his eyes. "Now," he said, "we fix it. We fix everything." And for the first time in years, he felt like he was stepping toward something that mattered not for the company, but for the people the company had forgotten. Morning light drifted over Riverstone like a tired sigh, brushing the snowy rooftops with a thin band of gold. The wind was gentler today, though the air still carried that sharp mountain chill that slipped through coat seams and stung at exposed skin. Maple Street remained hushed. Only a few early risers scraped frost from windshields or walked bundled dogs down the quiet sidewalks. The neon sign of Riverstone Diner still buzzed faintly, but the light flickered as if unsure whether it wanted to stay awake. Inside, a tension hung in the air. It was not the usual morning bustle. Instead, it was the uneasy electric silence of people sensing a storm forming from someplace they couldn't yet see. Jackson Hayes stepped out of a dark sedan parked near the curb. Today, he was not wrapped in worn flannel or broken boots. He wore a tailored navy coat, charcoal dress pants, and polished shoes that clicked sharply against the concrete. His posture was steady but solemn, his expression composed but shadowed by something weightier than authority. His gray-blue eyes, clearer now sharper, carried both determination and regret. Anyone looking at him from afar would have mistaken him for a visiting business executive, but somehow the mountain air and small-town quiet made him look even more out of place. He paused at the door, exhaled, and stepped inside. Riverstone Diner, usually indifferent to strangers, shifted as though the room itself recognized him. The clatter of dishes slowed. Conversations dwindled. Even the hum of the coffee machine felt muted. At the center of the diner stood Linda Rowe, the manager who had fired Emma the day before. She was organizing receipts at the register, her thin fingers moving quickly, but when Jackson entered, she froze. Her brown eyes blinked twice as if trying to align two impossible images, the ragged drifter from last night and the impeccably dressed CEO now walking toward her. Her mouth parted slightly. "You? Your yes?" Jackson said, voice calm, but carrying an unmistakable steel. "We met yesterday. You knew me as Jack." Then his voice dropped. "Today you know me as Jackson Hayes." A porcelain mug slipped from Linda's hand, shattering on the floor. Coffee splashed across her shoes, but she didn't even flinch. She simply stared at him, face draining of color. She tried to straighten herself, smoothing her apron as if good posture could repair the damage already done. "Mr. Hayes, I had no idea." "I didn't mean to." Jackson raised a hand, halting her excuses with a gentle but firm gesture. "This isn't about what you meant. It's about what happened." He stepped further into the diner, and behind the counter, a few cooks peeked out. Molly Jenkins, the petite red-haired waitress with the soft voice, clutched her pen like a lifeline as she stared wide-eyed. A dishwasher in the back, a lanky 16-year-old named Raymond with messy blonde hair and a timid smile, froze mid-stack of plates. Jackson's assistant and driver had insisted on sending security with him, but he refused. This was not a moment for spectacle. This was a moment for truth. Linda swallowed hard. "Sir, if I had known that I was the CEO," Jackson cut in voice still measured. "Would that have changed how you treated Emma?" Linda's face twitched, and she opened her mouth, but the answer would not come. Jackson let the silence linger. It was enough. He finally spoke again. "Call Emma Brooks. Tell her to come here immediately. I need to speak with her." He paused. "Privately." Linda nodded quickly and stepped away to make the call, her hands shaking so badly that she nearly dropped her phone twice. Jackson moved to one of the booths, not the same one he had sat in as Jack, but one near the window where the morning sun created a faint reflection on the table's chrome edge. He sat with his shoulders stiff, hands clasped loosely, forcing himself to breathe. He had spent years commanding boardrooms, but the thought of speaking to Emma now felt heavier than any executive meeting he had ever led. His heartbeat thrummed like distant thunder. 15 minutes later, the door chimed. Emma stood at the threshold. Her chestnut brown hair was loosely tied back strands escaping around her face. Her fair skin looked pale against the soft blue sweater she wore, and her eyes, normally warm and gentle, were red-rimmed from a sleepless night. She looked both fragile and brave, as if she had spent hours trying to stitch herself together for just this moment. Behind her, almost glued to her side, was Tommy Brooks. Tall, skinny jacket zipped to his throat, his dark brown hair stuck out in awkward angles as if he'd rushed out the door. His eyes were wary and sharp, watchful, like a stray dog ready to bite if anyone threatened his sister. Tommy's protectiveness, mixed with teenage exhaustion, hung over him like an oversized coat. Emma hesitated by the door, uncertainty flickering in her gaze. Linda gestured stiffly. "He's waiting for you." Emma stepped inside. Tommy followed closely, jaw tight. Jackson stood as they approached. For a moment, he didn't speak. He looked at Emma, not just at the tired eyes or the tremor in her breath, but at the strength she tried to hide beneath them. "Emma," he said gently, "thank you for coming." Her voice came out soft and strained. Why did you ask me here?" Jackson inhaled slowly. Because kindness should never cost someone their livelihood. Emma's breath caught. She blinked hard, not trusting herself to respond. "I owe you an apology," Jackson continued. "A deep one. What happened yesterday, what happened to you, was wrong. And the worst part is that it happened because I was here. Because I created a system where being human is treated as a liability." Emma swallowed, hands twisting together. Tommy stood just behind her, glowering at Jackson like a young sentry. Jackson thought briefly of himself at 17, angry, lost, misunderstood after his mother died. Tommy reminded him of that younger version of himself, and the memory softened something inside him. He looked at Tommy. "You must be her brother." Tommy lifted his chin, cautious. "Yeah, Tommy." Jackson nodded. "I've heard you've been trying to help your sister, working late, carrying more than someone your age should." Tommy's eyes widened, startled that a stranger, much less a CEO, knew that. I didn't want her to deal with everything alone." "You shouldn't have to," Jackson said quietly. "But I understand why you tried." The boy stared at him for a long moment, suspicion battling with something else, maybe relief, or maybe the desire to believe that someone besides Emma cared. Jackson shifted his focus back to Emma. "I want to make this right, not only for you, but for everyone in this company. Yesterday I saw the cost of my ignorance. You lost your job because you chose compassion over protocol. That will not stand." Emma's voice cracked. "Mr. Hayes—" "I know," he interrupted gently. "Please let me finish." He leaned his hands on the table, not as authority, but as sincerity made visible. "You deserve better, and I intend to fix everything that allowed this to happen." Emma looked at him through wet lashes. Something inside her, something bruised and trembling, stirred with a fragile hope. Jackson held her gaze. "Let me start now," he said softly. The diner around them was silent. Cooks paused mid-step. Customers froze mid-bite. Even the neon sign seemed to hesitate in its flicker. In that moment, everything began to shift. The day after Jackson's return to Riverstone, the winter sun rose warmer than usual, spilling soft amber light across the peaks and melting the thin crystals of frost that clung to the diner windows. Riverstone felt subtly changed, as if the town itself sensed a shift in the quiet rhythm of things, like a door had opened, letting in a gentler breeze. Inside the diner, the morning rush hummed, but beneath it flowed a current of anticipation. Some employees whispered about the CEO's visit. Others wondered why he had come back. But for Emma Brooks, none of that mattered yet. What mattered was that she had stood in front of Jackson Hayes and heard the kind of apology that didn't just mend a wound. It acknowledged, it honored it, and promised it would never be inflicted again. Now, 24 hours later, she found herself walking toward Hayes Hospitality headquarters in Denver, her old winter coat wrapped tight around her, the hem fluttering with each anxious step. She was nervous, unsure, but beneath that uncertainty flickered a stubborn hope. Tommy had insisted on coming with her, and now walked a few steps behind earbuds, dangling around his neck, his hands jammed deep into his jacket pockets. His messy brown hair blew across his face, but there was a rare brightness in his eyes, an excitement he couldn't hide, no matter how hard he tried to appear tough. The building loomed above them, tall and gleaming like some giant polished shard of ice. When the revolving doors opened, a rush of warm air greeted them, carrying the faint scent of cinnamon and freshly brewed coffee, comforting, almost homelike. A receptionist named Maria Townsend welcomed them. Maria was a plump woman in her late 40s with soft brown curls and warm caramel skin. She had bright almond-shaped eyes that crinkled at the corners when she smiled. She carried herself with kindness, an energy shaped by years of volunteering at animal shelters and caring for her elderly parents until their passing. That history made her gentle with strangers, and now she greeted Emma and Tommy with genuine warmth. "Mr. Hayes is expecting you," Maria said, standing gracefully from her seat. She wore a navy blazer pinned with a tiny silver cat brooch, a nod to her 3 rescue cats at home. "I'll take you to his office." They followed her through wide halls lined with photographs, employees smiling at team events, charity drives, and community projects. Emma noticed something subtle. These were the kinds of photos a company displayed not for show, but out of genuine pride. It made her heart lift a little. Maria knocked lightly on a frosted glass door. "Mr. Hayes, they're here. Send them in," came Jackson's voice, steady, warm, and certain. He rose from behind a sleek wooden desk as they entered. Today he wore a soft gray sweater instead of a suit, and it softened the sharp lines of his face. He seemed more like a human being and less like a towering executive. But his eyes, the gray blue that had seen her in her hardest moment, still carried that unwavering resolve. "Emma." "Tommy," he said. "Thank you for coming." Emma took a slow breath. "You said there was something important to discuss." "There is," Jackson answered. "Something big, something overdue." He motioned for them to sit at a small round table near the window. Outside, sunlight spilled across the city, casting everything in a glow that looked almost unreal. Jackson folded his hands. "After what happened at the diner, I spent the entire night reviewing our company policies, our culture, our history, and all the ways we've lost sight of what truly matters. Your kindness exposed something I've ignored for too long." Emma frowned softly. "I didn't mean to cause trouble." "You didn't," Jackson said firmly. "You revealed it." He took a breath. "Which is why I'm launching something new, something that will change this company from the inside out. It's called the Heart of Service Initiative." Tommy raised his eyebrows, curiosity replacing his earlier caution. Jackson continued. "It will provide emergency support for employees, offer medical assistance, set up scholarship programs, and reshape management training so compassion becomes a core value, not a liability." Emma felt her throat tighten. "That sounds incredible." "It will be," Jackson said. Then he looked at her with an expression she had never seen before, a blend of admiration and trust. "But it needs the right person leading it. Someone who understands struggle. Someone who has lived it, not studied it from a distance. Someone who knows what kindness looks like in real life." Emma blinked, breath-catching. "Emma," he said gently, "I want you to be the first community care coordinator for Hayes Hospitality Group." Her heart stumbled. "Me? I'm just a waitress." "No," Jackson said, voice firm yet warm. "You are someone with integrity, empathy, and courage. You didn't just feed a hungry man. You stood up for humanity. That's someone I want shaping the future of this company." Tommy looked at his sister, eyes shining with something like pride and disbelief. Emma felt the room tilt around her. "I don't have degrees. I don't have training." "We'll give you training," Jackson said immediately. "Resources, a team, a salary that ensures you and your brother never have to worry about rent or medicine again." Her breath trembled. "I don't know if I can do something so big." "But you've already done the hardest part," Jackson replied. "You stayed kind in a world that tried to punish you for it." Silence fell soft, warm, full. Emma's eyes glistened. She thought of nights spent counting coins for groceries, of Tommy working himself to exhaustion, of being fired in front of strangers for doing what felt right. And now, somehow standing here, being offered a chance not just to survive, but to make life better for countless others like her. She lifted her chin. "Okay," she whispered. "I'll do it." Jackson smiled, truly smiled, as if a weight had fallen from his shoulders. "Then let's begin." But he wasn't finished. Turning to Tommy, he said, "I heard you've been working at a garage." Tommy stiffened. "Yeah, I like engines, cars, fixing things." "I spoke with a technical academy in Denver," Jackson said gently. "They run one of the best automotive repair programs in the state, and I would like to offer you a full scholarship. Tools, books, tuition, everything covered." Tommy froze. For a second he didn't move or speak. Then his lips quivered. "Why? Why would you do that for me?" he whispered. "Because you stepped up when your sister needed you," Jackson said. "Now it's time someone stepped up for you." The boy's shoulders shook. He turned his face away, but a tear slid down his cheek anyway. Emma reached for him, pulling him close, and he pressed his forehead against her shoulder, crying quietly, the kind of tears that come not from pain, but from being seen for the first time. Later that afternoon, after leaving the headquarters, Emma and Tommy walked back toward Riverstone Diner. The sun was dipping behind the mountains, painting the snow a molten gold. The diner's windows shimmered, casting warm, familiar squares of light onto the snow-covered street. Emma paused in front of the entrance, feeling the cold breeze brush against her skin. Last time she stood here, she had been broken. But now she stood on the edge of something new, something bright. She looked at the place that had once taken everything from her, and somehow given everything back. A soft smile touched her lips, small, fragile, but filled with hope. Finally, she whispered, her voice as gentle as falling snow. Kindness found its way home. In the end, Emma's journey reminds us of something quietly powerful that lives inside everyday life. Miracles do not always arrive with thunder or bright lights. Sometimes they come through a bowl of soup, a soft word, a moment of courage, or the kindness we offer when no one is watching. It is in those humble choices that God often works His greatest wonders. This story shows that even when the world feels cold or unfair, God can turn pain into purpose and open doors no one expected. He can bring people together at the exact moment they need each other, and He can lift a broken life into a new beginning. What happened to Emma was not an accident. It was a reminder that grace can appear in the most ordinary places, and that kindness, even when costly, is never forgotten in the eyes of heaven. If this story touched your heart, share it so others can feel that same hope. Leave a comment below and tell us what part moved you the most. And if you believe that God still works through everyday angels like Emma, type Amen in the comments. Do not forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and join this community of people who still believe in compassion, grace, and second chances. May God bless you and everyone you love. Amen.